It's 6 p.m. July 16th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News Special. I'm Yoon Jung-min. Heavy downpours across the nation have devastated many parts, particularly in central regions. The authorities announced on Sunday that 33 people have died from torrential rainfall. 10 are still missing. Our Kim Jung-sil reports.
The devastating heavy downpours in central regions that began last Thursday caused flooding and landslides, taking lives and wrecking people's homes. One of the worst-hit areas, Yecheon-gun County in eastern Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. At least 17 people have died in Yecheon and its surrounding cities, including Mungyong and Yeongju, where a high-level landslide warning has been in effect. 9 people are still missing in the region. Another seriously hit area is in South Korea's central Chungcheongbuk-do Province, which has seen some extreme torrential rainfall. An underground tunnel in Osong has been flooded by the overflowing river nearby, causing people inside cars to be stuck underwater. At least 9 people have been found dead. The South Korean Fire Department said around 15 vehicles, including a bus, were trapped inside the tunnel. The rescue authorities added that they expect the water to be drained within Sunday. Thousands of homes across the country have also been evacuated as residents flee the rain. Around 8,000 residents in 13 cities and provinces, including Seoul, Busan, and Gwangju, have fled their homes and are taking shelter. People's properties have been ruined too. The authorities said at least 48 houses have been flooded, with more than 140 roads and public facilities damaged. Public transport is also affected due to the heavy rain. Around 10 national roads have been blocked for use, whereas 5 KTX tracks have been shut down. Train tracks across the nation are also affected. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, who's visiting Poland, held an emergency meeting online with the disaster control headquarters and ordered rapid recovery in the affected regions. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk Yeol has made a surprise visit to Ukraine, becoming the first South Korean leader to visit a nation at war. There, he promised for more non-lethal military supplies, such as mine detectors. Our presidential correspondent Woo Soo-young files this report from Poland.
South Korea has promised more non-lethal military supplies to Ukraine and over $200 million in humanitarian aid and loans to rebuild the war-torn country. Veering off his official trip to Poland, President Yoon Suk Yeol made a sudden state visit to Ukraine, travelling a total of 27 hours through road and rail, becoming the first South Korean leader to visit a nation at war.
우크라이나의 연대와 희망의 메시지를 전하기 위해 여기에 왔습니다. 저는 저와 우리 국민은 우크라이나가 자유를 되찾을 때까지, 국권을 회복할 때까지 여러분들과 함께 할 것입니다.
Following his talks with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky, Yoon declared a new aid package for Ukraine, dubbed the Ukraine Peace and Solidarity Initiative, comprising nearly 9 agreements on expanding Seoul's military, humanitarian and reconstruction assistance. According to Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-ho, Yoon first declared support for Zelensky's 10-point peace formula and efforts to hold a peace conference. While Seoul did not announce any lethal weapon support, it pledged to expand supplies of critical equipment for Ukrainian forces and support the recovery and counselling for children traumatized and violated by the ongoing war.
Specifically, we can happily conclude that an agreement on the transfer of specialized vehicles and technical equipment, including for demining, is already being implemented. This helps us preserve human lives. Thank you, Mr. President, for new initiatives on financial, technical, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine.
In terms of humanitarian aid, Seoul plans to increase its annual contribution this year by 30% on year to $150 million. Yoon also noted that around $100 million has been allocated for long-term low-interest loans in a bilateral MOU on funding Ukraine's various reconstruction projects. Yoon and Zelensky further agreed to cooperate on nurturing Ukraine's future generation, supporting online and offline education by providing laptops and rebuilding facilities, as well as creating a scholarship for Ukrainian students in South Korea. Prior to the summit, Yoon visited Bucha, a city whose people suffered brutal war crimes and massacre by Russian forces. He also toured Irpin, where fierce fighting led to nearly 70% of the city being destroyed. Amid concerns that Korea's broadening support for Kyiv may raise eyebrows in Moscow, Seoul says it will continue to pursue stable relations with Russia. Still, Yoon made it clear that Koreans stand in solidarity for the freedom, peace and recovery of Ukraine. Drawing parallels with South Korea's own rise from the ashes of war through the socio-economic miracle on the Han River, Yoon said he is confident that Ukraine is on the same trajectory of post-war recovery in the miracle on the Dnipro River. 오수영, Arirang News, Warsaw.
Before his one-on-one with President Zelensky, President Yoon and his wife visited the areas in Ukraine where civilian massacres have happened, sharing sorrow and pain with them. Kim Do-yeon has more.
The first place President Yoon Suk Yeol visited in Ukraine was a small city called Bucha. It's just a short distance from Kyiv, which became a target for Russian troops to create an outpost in the early stage of the war. The Russian military only stayed there for just about a month around last February, but during this short period, Bucha experienced nightmares. At the St. Andrew Church on Saturday, President Yoon was shown pictures of the civilian massacre that took place in Bucha.
전쟁 개시되고 한 달 조금 지나서 회복을 그 사이에 지금
More than 400 bodies were found in Bucha after the withdrawal of Russian troops. Ukrainian President Zelensky has called those killings an act of genocide. President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gon-hee then moved to the cemetery carrying lanterns in their hands and paid respect to the victims. They then moved on to the neighboring city Irpin, where 70% of the social and residential infrastructure was destroyed due to the Russian invasion. The president looked over at the buildings destroyed by bombing and cars that had shelling damage. The Ukrainian government says around 1,400 civilians have died in these two cities, including 37 children. When he arrived in Kyiv, the president visited the Wall of Remembrance and placed a wreath.
러시아의 불법 침략으로 인해 무고하게 희생된 우크라이나 시민들과 자유를 수호하기 위해 목숨을 바친 우크라이나의 젊은이들 그리고 그 유가족분들에게 깊은 애도를 표합니다.
The South Korean presidential office explained this visit is to stand in solidarity with Ukraine as a responsible member of the international community. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Yoon's trip to Kyiv sent a strong signal of support and cooperation for the war-torn nation, and it's also expected to have strengthened ties with the U.S. and Japan as they work to hold a trilateral summit next month. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji explains.
While pledging to expand support, President Yoon highlighted the importance of freedom and peace in Ukraine in a show of solidarity.
대한민국은 우크라이나의 자유와 평화, 번영을 가꾸는 동반자가 될 것이며 나아가 우크라이나와 함께 세계의 자유, 평화, 번영에 함께 기여하는 믿음직한 파트너가 될 것입니다. 그 희망찬 미래를 향해 저와 젤렌스키 대통령은 더욱 긴밀히 소통하고 협력해 나아갈 것입니다.
Pundits say Yoon's visit could be part of South Korea's efforts to strengthen security cooperation with the U.S. and Japan, as all three leaders have now visited Ukraine. In February, U.S. President Joe Biden made a surprise visit to Kyiv and promised to provide $500 million in additional military aid. Then in March, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also visited Ukraine and vowed to supply $30 million worth of non-lethal equipment. As South Korea works to strengthen partnerships with the U.S. and Japan, President Yoon's visit to Ukraine is expected to have brought the countries closer together ahead of their trilateral summit scheduled for next month in Washington. In fact, after wrapping up President Yoon's trip to the war-torn nation, the country's Deputy National Security Advisor, Kim Tae-hyo, said this came as South Korea works to expand cooperation with other countries.
Above all, President Yoon's visit took place as the Yoon administration's value diplomacy and responsible diplomacy have expanded beyond Asia, as the country works to closely cooperate with Europe and other parts of the world.
He added the issues on Ukraine could be discussed at summits, but by actually being on site, it was easier to tell what kind of cooperation was truly needed. He also explained that President Yoon's visit came at Zelensky's invitation, and that Yoon made the final decision after careful considerations over security and safety. Seoul's presidential office reportedly said it understood the invitation as part of Ukraine's expectations for South Korea, in terms of its role in the ongoing war, which is the most urgent issue within the international community. 배은지, Arirang News.
For in-depth talks on the South Korean President's Summit diplomacy this week, I'm joined by Professor Sung-Soo Eric Kim of Hanyang University and UNIST. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Before his trip to Ukraine, the South Korean leader was also in Lithuania for the NATO summit this week, and Korea is ramping up security cooperation with NATO and the West. What does the country gain from this diplomatic approach?
So if we summarize the core diplomatic strategy coming from the summits that we're doing between Korea and US, Korea, Japan, and Korea, Europe, and any other summits, the core message is that Korea will take an active role in the global leadership, and also we will cooperate with nations that have a value alliance, meaning that sharing the belief of freedom and democracy and a market economy. So it is important to actively participate in these global level important summits and events. And as what is important is we're being invited to these events, so we have to leverage that diplomatic opportunity. And what Korea really has to focus as an agenda to take global leadership is to become G8 in the future. And in order to do so, the Korea, US, Japan trilateral alliance is very important because if you look at G7, other European countries are pro-Korea, but Japan might be the casting vote of determining whether Korea can join G8 in the future. So we are strengthening alliance with US, Japan, and NATO nations to pursue our core strategy as global leadership and value alliance.
Professor, and the visit by a South Korean president to the war zone is unprecedented. What message is South Korea sending here to Ukraine and the international community?
So I think this visit is very symbolic because we were a country 70 years ago that had a war and received a reconstruction package. And now we are going to Ukraine, which is desperately requiring the international society to participate in the peaceful resolution of the war and also to participate in the future reconstruction plan. So I think that we are speaking as of the philosophy and of what we believe in as a freedom and democracy and a market economy, and being an example that a country that received a reconstruction package within such global cooperation can now become a donor in return. So I think this is a very, very strong message to the global society and also to Ukraine as a legitimate reason why Korea should participate in the reconstruction plan.
A strong message. And the South Korean president's surprise visit to Ukraine is grabbing headlines elsewhere too, as foreign media took particular note on Russia's leverage on North Korea. What's your comments on this?
So we have to recall how the concept of human rights and war crime has been developed. And tragically, it was developed based on our history of being a victim of World War II. And the world after the World War II have came together and reconciled and reflected how we can prevent such kind of war criminal activity and deprived human rights situations. And we are now saying, as a victim once, saying that we have to keep those standards. And because Ukraine is in a situation that is going against human rights and criminal wars, we're saying that we will defend those values and assist Ukraine to reconstruct. And this is a very, very symbolic message to Russia and North Korea that might have a human rights issue. And it's also becoming symbolic in the international society and recalling and refreshing the meaning of human rights and criminal wars.
And as part of the Ukraine Peace and Solidarity Initiative, the Korean president pledged more military supplies. There was no mention of lethal aid provision. Do you think there will be a change in policy under certain circumstances?
It is a very difficult call for the Korean government to consider a lethal military support as well. But again, it will be considered within the framework of the Indo-Pacific strategy and the Korea, U.S., and Japan trilateral alliance structure, and for the best national interest of Korea. Symbolized by the visit to Poland, we are strong in the defense industry as well right now. So we have FA-50 and we have very, very prestigious tanks. And KF-21 will be commercialized within a couple of years. We're discussing next year or the year after. And then as a long-term strategy, we would like to also participate in the defense system of Ukraine. Then in such situation, Korea have to show a stronger contribution in this war. And if the government comes to the conclusion that we will have to show a stronger contribution in order to have a higher share in the reconstruction plan, then I think that there is a possibility that the government might consider a lethal support. But with certain circumstances, again, that Russia is going too much beyond our standards of human rights and criminal activities, or in any events that Russia will use nuclear weapons, then those kind of situations will surely be the criteria that we can consider of providing a more active military support.
And speaking of reconstruction, Presidents Yoon and Zelensky agreed upon cooperation in rebuilding infrastructure in Ukraine, both at the government and business levels. What specific role can we expect from South Korea after the war?
We are strong in many industries. We're strong in construction, digital, and healthcare, and energy, et cetera, et cetera. We can't name all the industries that we're strong in. For construction, we have a history of providing the infrastructure to Middle East. And we also have participated in the reconstruction plan of Iraq. And also we have prestigious construction companies. So I think that we can have an active role in reconstruction. But what is more important for Ukraine is to pursue a digitalized reconstruction, meaning that they will need advanced telecommunication networks and also digital infrastructure such as data warehouses, etc., which Korean companies have a advantage. But at the same time, these kind of initiatives cannot be conducted alone. So we will need a global alliance in approaching these events. And that was one of the discussions that President Yoon have agreed with Poland just a couple of days ago.
And Professor, let's talk about the war in Ukraine. Is there an end in sight? And what do you say about Russian President Putin's grip on the invasion?
So if for any war, if it gets longer, the country that is attacking or invading the other country will face a internal political issue, because there surely will be a political group that oppose to the idea of going war. And I think the example of Prigozhin, performing a rebellion against Putin is symbolizing the domestic conflict that Russia is having. However, at the same time, Ukraine and Russia has nowhere to back up in the situation. So they will surely pursue on their best national interests to conclude the war. And the geopolitical situations in Europe will also influence a possibility to find a peaceful resolution of this war. And in my opinion, if the war continues until wintertime, then I think Europe will try to find a peaceful resolution of this war, because Putin's best strategy is to have Europe as a hostage of the energy that they're exporting to Europe. For example, Europe depends on about more than 30% in oil from Russia, and about 26% in natural gas from Russia. So, but that was the strategy of Russia, but it didn't work last winter, unfortunately, or fortunately, because the winter of Europe showed a historically warm winter. So some countries were wearing short sleeves. So Europe was not really heavily demanding energy last winter, but we'll have to look at the temperature of the winter time in Europe, which will determine a lot of accelerated discussion of ending this war.
We will have to see how it plays out.
Yes.
And Professor, Sweden and Finland pivoted away from neutral and towards NATO this year. Is Putin's invasion of Ukraine backfiring only to intensify expansion of NATO?
Okay, so after World War II, at least in Europe, there were international measures to prevent a warfare situation that goes against human rights and war criminal standards that we have built. And those mechanisms are NATO and United Nations and etc. And I think that this tragical event that Russia invading Ukraine shows the robustness of the international cooperation system that we have built over more than about 80 years now. So the reason why Russia was invading Ukraine was because of the fear that Ukraine might join NATO, and it's backfiring that the countries like Sweden, which were neutral even during World War II, is now considering joining NATO. So I think this shows how we have built a robust global society to prevent such kind of criminal activities against other countries. And also the Indo-Pacific strategy can probably use this as an example of considering building a framework of how we prevent such situations in the Indo-Pacific area if one country is trying to invade another country and also are trying to harm the standards that we have built in terms of human rights and war criminal activities.
Professor Sung-Soo Eric Kim of Hanyang University and UNIST, thanks for your insights.
Thank you very much.
And that is Arirang News Special this evening. Have a great rest of the weekend.